Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 of the week 7 lecture on profiling. In this section we're going to move right away from FBI profiling and move to some other types of profiling and different researchers. So you have to remember this is not part of FBI profiling. So first up we're going to look at investigative psychology. More science than art, we're now moving to the science more than the art. So this type of psychology was pioneered by David Kantor in the 1980s. So he focused on quantitative analysis. This is statistics. So if we have 100 cases of a particular crime, what do these offenders have in common? So we're making a statistical analysis of offenders. This type of investigative psychology, so profiling, covers a really broad range of crimes. So the FBI profiling really just sticks to rape and serial killing and unusual types of sexual killers, whereas this one can deal with arson, burglary, fraud, and a lot of other crimes. So not focusing on the bizarre extreme crimes that the FBI focuses on. Some prefer to use the term behavioural investigative advice and not offender profiling. Try to sever that connection to FBI profiling and move it a little bit apart. So how did this all come about? Well, in the 1980s, between 82 and 86, these rapes were happening around railway stations. So thus the name of the railway rapists. They started as rapists, became killers. And it turns out it was two guys, but as I said, they started raping and then they moved on to killing and killed 3 people. So David Kantor was called in when the police weren't making very much progress and the general public were getting really afraid of being out and about. Kantor was, and probably still is, an investigative psychologist. So firstly, he gave police an idea of where the offender may live and did a psychological profile as well. His profile did not lead to their arrest, but the main one was arrested when he was caught stalking a woman in a park. And that main offender, Mr. Duffy, was caught almost by accident, but fit the profile really, really well. So after this, they used this type of profiling much more in the UK, and this is how investigative psychology started. So there's 2 main types. So there's geographical profiling and there's statistical profiling, and we are going to explore them both in a bit more depth today. First of all, we're going to look at geographic profiling, location, location, location. Where you live is everything. Okay, so this focuses on features of the environment. So crime hotspots, how people get to and from crimes, what are the opportunities for crime to happen? Where were they committed? How far are people travelling to commit the crimes? This information is based on serial offending of a range of crimes, not just killing. We get lots and lots of crimes that have been solved because obviously we've got the offenders and we get this information. So we use this existing information to determine spatial information about the offender. And this is to help us in the future to be able to look at not only where we think crime might have happened, but where the offenders are living. This is driven by research. So this is all empirical research. It's not intuition and it's not subjective opinion. So it has a theoretical base to it, which is really, really important. And that theoretical base comes from routine activity theory. So this refers to the activities that we do every day. So what do we do every day? Well, usually in non-COVID times, we get up and we go to work, or we go to uni, we go out to lunch, or anything else that we do during the day. And we need to have a convergence of these 3 things. So a likely offender who is very motivated to commit a crime. If you've got a high conscience or morals, you would not be likely to be an offender because you would not be motivated to be an offender. And that's probably true for all of you. A guardian. So you could be motivated and you could be a likely offender, but if you're standing outside a police station or standing underneath a camera or standing next to your mum or dad, you're not likely to commit a crime because that's going to stop you from doing it. We need to have a target. So if you're motivated, there's no one around, as in a capable guardian, to stop you, but you still can't commit the crime if there's no one around or nothing around you to commit the crime. So you need to have a target. So what do some offenders do all day? Well, if they hang around the shopping centre, then it's likely to happen there. If they're at work all day, then it would be more likely to happen there. Or if you're 3 young women, you could fly to Melbourne and it could happen there. Okay, they're away from their parents. They are motivated to commit a crime. Obviously, they felt that there was a suitable target in Melbourne, and that's what they went down there for. So that's routine activity theory. Convergence in time and space of a motivated offender, a suitable target, and absence of capable guardians. And they're the implications on the screen, which I'm sure you've read by now, because you can learn crime possibilities as part of your daily routine. Then we've got rational choice perspective. So this is the economic model because it's looking at the costs. What are the costs going to be to me if I commit this crime, weighing it up against the benefits? So people make decisions based on the costs and benefits. And I know we've covered that one before, but it never hurts to do a little bit of revision. Criminal range. This refers to the area where criminals commit their offences. Criminals tend to offend close to home. They're not travelling great distances to commit crimes. They're usually staying close to home. And this could be for any number of reasons. One big one could be is that they don't have access to a car to travel a long way, so they're dependent on public transport. So the further they get away from home, crime decreases for that particular offender. So they have the resources, familiarity and opportunity impact upon their comfortable range. If they've got a car, like I said, they can travel further. Research on rapists shows that young rapists are likely to commit crime close to home, whereas older rapists are more likely to commit offences further away from home. Have a think about why that might be. Well, one big reason could be that young rapists haven't thought through properly what the cost to them is going to be if they're seen. Older rapists would understand that if they commit crime close to home, they're more likely to be seen by someone who knows them. So they're going to travel further away to escape that familiarity. So this 2009 study was done by Cantor again, who is the preeminent researcher in this area, of 15 serial rapists and 110 offences. So the furthest away was 1.3 miles, which is 2.09 kilometres. So not very far at all. So this shows most offences happen very close to home. Half a mile is 800 metres. What's not shown here is the age of the offenders. So we could start to think that perhaps the ones that are down towards this end, getting further away from home, are your older offenders, and these here at the beginning are your younger offenders. And that would be consistent with the fact that younger people tend to commit this type of crime more than older people. In the Daniel Morcombe case, the police were actually looking for registered sex offenders who lived close to the area, and they know this stuff, and that's how they got onto Brett Cowan fairly quickly, because he was a registered sex offender who lived in the area. So there are some spatial, just go to the next slide, please. Okay, spatial models of offending. So we've got two. We've got the marauder model and we've got the commuter model. So the commuter model says that they commit crime in the general area where they live. So if you figure out the criminal range, you should be able to get a fairly good idea of where the offender lives. So you draw a circle around the outside where the farthest away crimes are, join the lines and use it as the diameter, and you will hypothesize that the offender resides within the circle somewhere because they won't travel too far away from home. So the commuter model, on the other hand, is saying that the offender travels into a different area to commit crime. The bottom circle is where they live, so they move out of their home area to commit crime. So there's two spatial models there to show that they either stay close to home or they are travelling. Well, what would theory predict? Let me just get rid of that. That's better. Okay, so with routine activity theory, it's an extension of areas you are familiar with that are in your daily routine. So you're not going to think as much about the risks as rational choice, because rational choice, they're weighing up the risks. Routine activity, they're motivated to commit crime. Okay, so with rational choice, if you're rationally thinking about the risks, you're probably not going to do it close to home because you might be concerned that you'll be identified by a neighbour or someone who knows you. When you move, they would not go to familiar close to home areas, but move to a really totally different area. So you wouldn't, if you're going to shift house, you're not going to shift house somewhere close to where you were already living. You go to somewhere totally different where you're not known at all. Routine activities, the model that would be predicted by routine activities would be the marauder model, because they're just going to have a criminal range that is small around their house because they are motivated to commit crime. For rational choice, the model would be the commuter model, because they are thinking about the cost to them if they're seen by someone in the area, so they're more likely to move far away from home to decrease the risk of being caught. So here is some empirical support for the marauder model, showing that arsonists are marauders, so they're close to home. Rapists are marauders, close to home, whereas burglars tend to not be marauders so much, but move out of their circle around where they live and go to other areas. Why do you think that might be so? Well, again, they probably don't want to be seen by anyone in the area that might know them. But if they go to a different area, there might be better picking there. There might be better stuff to steal, as it were. So we've seen that rapists, young rapists particularly, are more likely to be marauders. But with arsonists, if you set a house on fire or something that's not far away from where you live, you're not going to look out of place, perhaps being on the street watching what's happening. And a lot of arsonists want to do that. Okay, but the marauder model assumes that offenders travel equally in any direction. So I want you to have a think about it, and if you've got a pen and paper there, draw a dot in the middle for where you live and a circle, you know, like a centimetre or so out around it. The marauder model is assuming that the offender is equally likely to travel in any direction in that circle. But do they do that? You have a think about it. Do you travel in every direction around where you live on a regular basis, or are there some routes that you go on more often than others? Okay, I certainly know that I don't travel in every direction from my house. There are routes that I travel more often, and I think that would be fairly true of everyone. So this is a very big weakness of the model. So people in an area bound by a circle are not necessarily going to travel to any point in that circle as the marauding pattern suggested, and this is the weakness of it. Whereas the windshield wiper pattern suggests that most people will travel on the same non-criminal paths each day going to or from work. So therefore the offenders will probably also travel along these routes. Okay, so think about where you live and where you work. You probably travel that route every day going to and from work. And the suggestion is that criminals may also travel those routes because they know that that's where people are going to be. So if you have a look at this one here, this pattern suggests that the offender would be expected to be biased in a particular direction, probably in centres of population density. Okay, so you can see that this is kind of like a windshield pattern, a windshield wiper pattern, all right, based on this here. So this again was reproduced from Cantor. This little square thing here represents a train, I think it's meant to be, or transport of some description. So again, empirical support, very important that we have theory and research to back up. So the empirical support for this was done by Cantor again, who investigated 79 US serial killers. So where they lived in comparison to where they committed their offences. And this was what they found out. So it's not a circular pattern, it's not even a right angle, but it is more like a windshield pattern. So you can see that it was 60 degrees, but the angles did range between 30 and 100. So we have some sort of empirical support here for the windshield wiper pattern. Okay, this is a really, really interesting concept that you're going to hear more about in a presentation in the tutorial today, but it's about mental maps. So, and these are really subjective. It tells us about you. So if we were on campus and I asked you to draw a map of the campus, you would all focus on different things. So a subjective image is what is stored in your brain, and it's different to a map. So it is a spatial form of the environment. It includes not only knowledge of features and spatial relationships, but also reflects your individual preferences for and attitudes towards places. It then becomes a mental or cognitive map. So if I ask someone to draw or ask all of you to draw a mental map of the university campus, some of you might focus on the library, some of you might focus on the uni bars, some of you might focus on coffee shops, some of you will know where the building is that you have to go to, and especially with the Gold Coast campus, you might not even think about what's over the other side of the bridge, because that's quite something that you don't usually have much to do with. You might go over the other side of the bridge simply to catch the tram or a bus, so you would only have a mental map of that part of it. So geographical features can impact upon mental maps and therefore offending. So something like a highway could be a mental barrier to crossing that boundary to another place. So where there's the highway, that could be the end of what you subjectively have in your map, because you don't go over to the other side. So in effect, it creates a mental barrier, that road. So we're going to have a look at one now. So this is the mental map of a cat burglar or a burglar. So all of the X's are, you can see here on all of the streets, they're all the houses he's burgled, and yet he lives there. So he lives really close to where he burgles. For him, here's the canal here, and you can see on the canal here that there's lots of stuff on the other side of the canal there, but there's nothing for him. So that canal is kind of like his mental barrier. So he doesn't see anything on the other side of the canal. It's not as common to have the offender's home quite this close, but it's not unknown. There are bridges, but they act kind of as a mental barrier for him. He's left out the big sports ground, which is just here. So there's a big sports ground right there. He hasn't gotten it at all. And he's not noticing it because he's got other things on his mind. So if a profiler was looking at this, they might start to think that this person is not actually into sports because they haven't put it in there. So what sort of model is this person? Well, this person would be said to be a marauder because they pretty much have travelled in just about every direction except over that canal. And here there's no homes, so they haven't been able to burgle that. Okay. I'll let you watch this YouTube clip. It is a little bit dry, but I really would watch it because it's quite interesting to listen at the end who the person is that they came up with here as being the offender, keeping in mind that Jack the Ripper has never ever been caught. But this shows you how they use geographical profiling, and they actually go into the streets and do tours, because you can go to London, when you can go to London, and do Jack the Ripper tours and go around to all the spots the bodies were found and see how he did it all, even though they've never caught him. So just have a think, and at the end I want you to think about, if it is the last guy that they come up with, what sort of model of offending applies to him. Was it commuter or marauder? And I'll leave you to figure that one out, and if you don't think you know the answer, you can ask me. Okay, our last one, statistical profiling. Numbers, numbers, numbers. But what is it? Well, it's similar in a way to FBI profiling, as we're going back to the scene to look at the offenders of the behaviours. but it is statistical, not intuitive. So we take all of the features of a rape or a killing, for example, what weapons were involved, that's all put into a computer program, and it'll tell you what characteristics of the offences occur together. So in rape, it will give you the common behaviours that occur together of those rapists. And the idea is that some behaviours are likely to occur together, whereas other behaviours might rarely occur with certain other behaviours. And this is what it might look like on a, this is called the smallest space analysis. So in the middle, these are the things in a rape that happen frequently. These all occur very frequently. The things at the outside occur much less frequently. So you can look at the things that occur together and apart. So sodomy and apologises occur together, or a rapist who wears a disguise and doesn't apologise aren't there at all. Doesn't happen very often at all. Okay. Sorry, if they wear a disguise and won't apologise, that happens together. They don't do those sorts of things. But those things close together happen frequently together. Even though they're under different headings, if they're there together, then they happen together frequently. All right, Davies in 1997 studied a sample of rapists, 87 of whom were already known to the police. So in investigating the relationship, he was looking at the type of behaviour of the rapist during and after the rape and their criminal histories. So how did he find out all of this information? Well, some of it he found out by asking the victims. A lot of it he found out by asking the victims. Did they have a rope? Did they have a disguise? Was a weapon used? Was anything taken? How did they treat you? So they get all this information from speaking to the victims. And then they can establish what type of previous offences these rapists may have committed to help narrow down the search. So this is the sort of information they came up with. If you've got a rapist who has a previous record for burglary, that can be predicted when they do the rape that they will have been involved in burglary, because they take fingerprint precautions. So they're very, very careful not to leave their fingerprints. That's the sort of thing they've learned from being a burglar. There can be theft from the victim, forced entry, and alcohol at or before the crime. So if you have a rapist who's taken precautions, you might have a rapist who has previous convictions for burglary. You can predict a previous record of violent crime by their use of extreme violence, their comments to the police, and their deliberate lying. And remember, they found out all of this by speaking to lots and lots of victims, by looking at what's happened in interviews and talking to police, and probably even talking to the rapists. If they are found to have a lack of previous convictions for sexual offences, well, this can be predicted by these things. So they don't take any precautions to hide their fingerprints. There is alcohol at or prior to the crime, because remember that the victims will be able to smell it on them probably. And there's forced entry or a confident approach. Okay, so they can start to put together this information to show what's going on with these rapists. So the summary of statistical profiling is that it can empirically test some of the assumptions made using the FBI profiling approach. It can actually test their intuitive approach that the FBI took. It's assisted to move criminal profiling into a more scientific pursuit, constantly looking at new software and programs, move it to a more scientific pursuit rather than art. It's not often used as a basis for arrest, but it is used to assist police in an investigation, not an arrest, but to point them in the right direction. Okay, so hang on, let me just turn the page to find this one. Okay, so in summary, we looked at the approaches to offending profiling, including FBI, geographical, and statistical. Although widely used, FBI profiling lacks empirical support. Geographical profiling has been used with some success to predict an offender or an offender's location, and statistical profiling aims to find the patterns to generate more empirically driven offender profiles. Okay, that is all for part 3 for this week. I will see you in tutorial later. Have a great week.